Good afternoon, and welcome to the October Lecture of the Wonders of the World, or WOW, webinar series. The WOW program is sponsored by the Friends of the Lafayette Library and Learning Center, which is the all-volunteer organization that sells used books to support the Lafayette Library. And I'm Ellen Reinches, the coordinator for the Friends WOW program. Because this is only the second webinar I've hosted, I ask you to bear with me if something doesn't go right. I have my sound turned up all the way, so I hope everyone can hear me. Our lecture today is about Diego Rivera, the artist and husband of Frida Kahlo, who was the topic of last month's webinar and the subject of a current exhibit at the de Young Museum in San Francisco. Our speaker is Avril Angevine, a popular independent art lecturer. Before we begin, I'd like to bring you up to date on the Lafayette Library, which is one of 26 libraries in the Contra Costa County system and is currently open for curbside pickup of books that have been placed on hold. I'd like to especially commend our library manager, Vicki Shaka, and her staff for the invaluable service to the community during these difficult times. The Friends of the Library have traditionally hosted the WOW and Sweet Thursday author events in person. However, there are currently no public in-person programs being held in the library complex. The Friends have now moved these programs online through 2 webinar series. We are in the process of scheduling new webinars, and here are a few coming attractions. Next month, on November 18th at 2 p.m., we'll host an out-of-area museum, the Woodson Art Museum from Wausau, Wisconsin. Since 1976, the Woodson has hosted a unique international juried show called Birds in Art. I saw the traveling version of this at the California Academy of Sciences in the mid-1980s and was fascinated by how many different types of art could be created around just one word. So if you like art and you like nature, especially birds, you will love this exhibit. The museum director and director of education will fly us through the 2020 exhibit, which opened in September and includes a few artists from Northern California. On the December 14th at 2 p.m., the Legion of Honor will return, or actually the Fine Arts Museums will return with a discussion of the exhibit on Pompeii, which is scheduled for the Legion of Honor. And our next Sweet Thursday is on Thursday, November 19th at 5 p.m. The author is Lindsay Chervinsky, and the book is The Cabinet, George Washington and the Creation of an American Institution. The U.S. Constitution never established a presidential cabinet. The delegates to the Constitutional Convention explicitly rejected the idea. So how did George Washington create one of the most powerful bodies in the federal government? Attend this webinar and find out. I would also like to direct you to an event sponsored by the Lafayette Library Foundation. It's a distinguished speaker event, will be held on Monday, November 9th at 4 p.m. The author is Jess Walton, and the book is The Cold Millions. Next, I have a few Zoom items. The Friends webinars accommodate 500 people. Registration is unique. With Zoom, there is the possibility of oversubscription. Zoom lets the first 500 people in, so please don't wait until the last minute to register and join the webinar. So today we will be asking questions via the Q&A function. So if you have a question, please type that there, and we'll save the art ones for the end and ask Avril a selection of them. So if you're not familiar with the Lafayette Library and want to get onto the email list where you can find out about more of our programs, the best way is to subscribe to the ad lib, which comes out once a week on Saturday mornings, and it's published by the Lafayette Library and Learning Center Foundation. And if you go to their website at llcf.org, you will find a place where you can click subscribe, and that will take you to the form. Alternatively, if you're interested in other programs at other libraries in Contra Costa County, you can go to the county website, ccclib.org. There's an events tab at the top. If you click on that, it will take you to all the listing of programs. And if that's kind of too much to digest at one time, there are filters on the left, for example, location or types of events. I want to tell you a little bit about the Friends of the Lafayette Library. We're the organization that for many, many years has sold donated books to support the library. We have a retail store called Friends Corner Bookshop, which is located on the lower level of the library building on the back on Golden Gate Way. It houses about 20,000 volumes, typically priced between 50 cents and $3. We also sell higher value books through Amazon. At normal times, we use these funds to support extended hours, purchase of books, audiobooks, and magazines, programs put on not only by the Friends, but also by the librarians, and also for some support with our partners in the foundation, in the facility. Currently, Friends Corner Bookshop is open. It had closed in mid-March and opened on a limited basis in early September. And so we have some curbside pickup. Our Amazon store is also open, and this can be accessed via the Friends website. We're not yet accepting book donations, however. So if you're interested in learning more about the curbside pickup or to get to Amazon, the place to go is the Friends website, which is at llcf.org/friends-book-shop. Today's speaker is Avril Angevine, who has come to us in person quite a few times over the last few years. Avril has a website called talkingaboutart.net, and she's an art educator and lecturer. She delivers independent art lectures through the East Bay Osher Lifelong Learning Institute. She's also a docent with SF MoMA and the Oakland Museum. And, you know, she has a few other descriptions here. She's a Francophile, a fashionista, and I really love that red outfit in her picture, and a friend to dogs. So let us welcome Avril.
Okay. Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you, Ellen. I'm really happy to be back here. Wish I were in person, but this is the way we do things now. And actually, for an art lecture, probably you're going to see the images better on your screen than you usually do when they're projected. So hopefully it'll work out. So I'm going to share my screen here with you and get going. Slideshow from the beginning. There we are. Okay, so as Ellen said, I know you've learned a lot about Frida Kahlo in the last few weeks, and possibly you've seen the exhibition about her at the De Young, which is just reopened. So today I'm going to fill in about the other half of this powerful artistic pair. That's Diego Rivera, lovers, co-conspirators, artistic partners, and undoubtedly among the century's most important power couples, Frida and Diego. Now, in their lifetime, Diego was by far the more celebrated figure. He was larger than life in every way. But in our time, Frida's reputation has surpassed his. Frida somehow transcended the fairly conservative time and place in which she lived and tapped into a feminist consciousness that has grown and flowered by the end of the century. Now, her works are intensely personal, as we know. Almost all of them are self-portraits. And she had a compelling, very tragic story so that we feel for her and admire her grit. We feel connected to her, maybe like in the way we feel connected to someone like Vincent van Gogh, who also had a tragic story. Now, although Frida denied being a surrealist, she said her works reflected reality, not surreality. Nevertheless, her mysterious canvases filled with symbols leave plenty of room for speculation. Now, Diego's works, on the other hand, and especially his murals, are social, political in intention, and they reflect a worldview that had really run its course by the end of the century. And this work called The Arsenal, there we have Frida in the center handing out weapons, and we have David Siqueiros on the left and photographer Tina Modotti on the right. The banderole, the ribbon around it says, this is what the revolution is going to be, right? Here's the revolution with artists in it. So Diego's works are packed with imagery, but the meaning of his works is as clear as Frida's is baffling. His murals reflect historical and contemporary reality as Rivera saw it. But in the current moment, with the resurgence of murals and other forms of street art that really ask us to attend to the world, including the political world around us, Rivera's art certainly has something to tell us. In fact, Rivera and the mural movement he was part of was really something of an anomaly in the 20th century. Right? Modern movements in Western art, beginning with the Impressionists in the 1870s, were far more concerned with form. That is, the way they were painted, the way objects could be depicted, what the boundaries of art might be. That was more important than content, than what was depicted. So the Impressionists painted the world around them, but having come to the realization that so-called reality changes depending on light conditions, they developed new ways of painting to account for light effects. For example, placing dabs of color next to each other rather than mixing colors together on the palette the way the old masters had done. Now, other modern artists experimented in other ways. Matisse, for example, freed color from serving reality so that his wife here, who was dressed in black, can appear in a color scheme like this with green on her nose as well. Others like Cézanne, for example, focused on revealing the shapes underneath objects. Spanish sociologist and art critic Jose Ortega y Gasset called these new ways of depiction dehumanization. That is, a deformation of reality that would force viewers to come up with new, purely aesthetic ways of responding to art. Now, even early in the century, some went as far as abstraction. But what Ortega y Gasset means by dehumanization is that these modern artists give up the right, or possibly the obligation, to present uplifting content. So far from using their canvases to tell us what to think, what was right, what was ethical, they just gave us geometry. Now, of course, early 20th century artists, like all artists, lived in a social and political world, and theirs was a world in turmoil. So in addition to the massive technological changes of those days when airplanes and cars and movies, telephones made their first appearance and Sigmund Freud popped up to tell everybody what their hidden sources of behavior were. In addition to all this, we have World War I that blasted people to their core. So artistic responses to the war include things like Expressionism and Dada. These were clearly modern forms of art, dehumanized art perhaps, but they expressed angst and outrage for sure, like this one. But at this point, they're not as pointed as what the mid-century muralists, whether Los Tres Grandes in Mexico or even our Coit Tower muralists in San Francisco. Victor Arnautoff was a Coit Tower artist, but this image, of course, is a contested one from George Washington High School. In any case, Rivera, of course, was a communist, and it's actually in the Soviet Union that we find art with a narrative bent, a sloganeering bent, that actually matches Rivera's. Clearly, Rivera is a different artist. He's much more modern an artist. He straddles both worlds. But nevertheless, Diego Rivera was hired by people like the Rockefellers to do a little bit of decorating. So the century gets very complicated. But let's go back a bit and see where the worldwide phenomenon that was Diego Rivera actually came from. he was exceptional from birth. Diego and his twin brother, Jose Carlos, were born in 1886 in Guanajuato, a colonial city in the mountains of central Mexico that was once a silver mining town and is considered one of the most beautiful in Mexico. His twin brother died at 18 months. The parents, fearing for sickly little Diego's health, placed him with an indigenous wet nurse who also let a goat suckle him, as Rivera says in his autobiography. When a sister was born, the family reunited and moved to Mexico City. Rivera's parents were teachers, and Rivera was reading at age 4. He did brilliantly at school, and by 12, he was studying painting and sculpture under the largely conservative faculty at the Academy of San Carlos, the oldest art academy and gallery in the Americas. It was founded in 1781. Here's an early work of his from his senior year show, Threshing Floor. So you can see where he started. Now in 1906, when he was 20, Rivera won a scholarship to study in Europe, and he very soon found himself in Madrid at the San Fernando Royal Academy, Spain's most prestigious, where Francisco Goya had once been the director. More recent students included Pablo Picasso, Salvador Dali, and, wait for it, Oscar de la Renta. The Spanish masters, Goya, Velázquez, El Greco, whom he studied at the Prado, influenced Rivera's style. So we see an early night scene in Avila, very dark. And this really interesting self-portrait that he did. This, by the way, is a photo of him at the same period. That's what he looked like, same hat. From Madrid, he moved to Paris, where he began living the artist's life, painting in a rather impressionistic style, exhibiting and living in typical bohemian poverty and squalor in Montparnasse. So Rivera spent 12 years in Paris, and he soon discovered and embraced Cubism. He met Piet Mondrian, and Rivera's first Cubist work, kind of a watercolor of trees, was inspired by Mondrian's early experiments. Picasso knew him, encouraged him, and approved of his work. But still, Diego Rivera goes his own way, even in his Cubist-inspired works. So for example, in this early view of Toledo, he is still thinking about El Greco's view of Toledo from 1600. It's got a lot of Cubist activity going on, but it's still fairly representational, and these wonderful light colors, quite a different take on Toledo than what El Greco did, or this view called Fountain in Toledo, in which we find very flat, abstract shapes, although they're curvy, especially in the background. In the foreground, the women are still fairly three-dimensional, and they have a lot of movement in them, and a lovely color too. Now, by this Eiffel Tower of 1914, he's looking a little bit more typically Cubist, but the portrait of his friend, Mexican painter Adolfo Best, Mogart, just this wonderful image combining these diagonals in the fence and the wheel in the back, which was the giant wheel, it was called, that was for the 1900 World's Fair in Paris. It's very elegant kind of work. And so we have more, he gets kind of more cubistical here, although the one on the left of Martin Luis Guzman is interesting in that we see the chair caning in the background on the left, which was a typical thing that the Cubists like to do, combined with the Mexican serape in the work. These works, even the one on the right, has a little more depth, a little more sense of foreground and background than is typical in Cubism. Plus, he's using color, which is always important to him. He was also influenced by discussions on the role of art in the service of the revolution that preoccupied the large group of emigre artists who were in Paris at the time. Rivera made quite a name for himself with this Zapatista Landscape of 1915. again, which while being very cubist, has a great deal of foreground and background going on. In the background are the mountains around Mexico City. And of course, we see the rifle, the Mexican fabric, and even the hat going on there. Here he is with this painting, so you can see the size that it is. And while we're here, here's a portrait of him by another of his friends and comrades at the time, Amedeo Modigliani, who, as you know, if you know his works, they generally feature people who are long and narrow. And so this is a one-off for him, his portrait of Diego Rivera there. It's kind of cool. But in 1917, Rivera had a serious disagreement with Picasso, and he kind of abandons Cubism and starts looking instead back to Cézanne type of thing, and returning to naturalistic imagery, as in this, I think, really wonderful picture called Aqueduct. Now, on the social side, while he was in Paris, he married the first of his 4 marriages, although you could say 5 because he married Frida twice. He was married to a Russian painter named Angelina Belov. There's a portrait of her that he did in his fairly, as you can see, impressionistic style. Their son, Diego, died of flu at age 2, and mother and son are celebrated in this work of 1916, Motherhood. This is one of his final Cubist works. And if you notice here, what's really startling about this work is the color. And just for comparison, this is a Picasso, girl or woman with a mandolin. And you can see that although the figures are fairly similar, even in the way they're constructed, it's the color in Rivera's work that really brings it out. That's unusual in Cubist work of this time, but that's him. Now, despite the rapid development of his work in these years, at the end of his time, his decade in Paris, he still felt that something was absent from his work. And as Ortegui Gasset pointed out in his essay, The Dehumanization of Art, Cubism and these other severely modern types of art seemed only to be enjoyed by forward-thinking intellectuals. They created a division that really hadn't existed before between those who can understand art and those who don't. Liking is something else, but understanding. Now, Rivera felt that art should be enjoyed by everyone, especially by the poor and by working people. And he began to interest himself in the folk art and ancient masterpieces of his native land. By 1918, after World War I, there was a general return to a classically inspired realism among European artists, even Picasso and Giorgio de Chirico here. And Rivera, by 1920, was in Italy, where he discovered murals of the Italian Quattrocento, the 15th century, and in them, he found the inspiration for a new and revolutionary public art capable of furthering the ideals of the revolution in his native land that, as you know, went on from 1910 to about 1920. So fired up with enthusiasm, Rivera returned to Mexico in 1921, leaving behind his wife Angelina and a daughter, Marika, born to Marevna Vorobiev-Stebelska, whom he did not marry. There she is, and you can see a picture of her. She actually does have kind of a triangular face. She is considered the first female cubist. Here's a painting. This is like the nicest portrait I've ever seen of Diego Rivera that she did of him. So he left his wife and the daughter of Marevna, Marika, behind. Here's Marika later in life. She never had a relationship with Diego. She went to England, became an actress and photographer and model. Very dramatic. All right. Now, although Rivera had visited Mexico more than once during his European years, his return in 1921 really affected a change in his attitudes as well as in his painting. He was overwhelmed by the beauty and richness of Mexico, of his native land, and viewing it with fresh eyes brought different aspects of it to his attention. And he said, My style was born like a child in an instant, with the difference that this birth took place after 35 agonizing years of pregnancy. So this is an early work that he did back in Mexico called The Bather of Tehuantepec. Okay. In the early 20s, with the armed struggle at an end, the post-revolutionary government in Mexico created new institutions to shore up the social and political changes effected by the revolution. And an important man in this regard is the Minister of Public Education, Jose Vasconcelos. That's him all the way on the left, sitting next to Diego Rivera. So Vasconcelos understood the importance of culture in the struggle to promote Mexican identity, and he began an ambitious literacy campaign throughout the country. He established the Escuelas de Pintura de Aire Libre, the open-air painting schools, to encourage creativity among children, among workers, and there were programs in plastic arts, dance, and theater also. Most importantly, he wanted the state to sponsor murals on public buildings, big, bright, clearly understandable images that would be open to everyone to see and would illustrate for everyone the ideals of Mexicanidad, of Mexicanness. Clearly, this project was tailor-made for Diego Rivera, and he understood the importance of this aesthetic revolution as well as anyone of his generation. In his mural projects, as well as in his easel paintings, we can see him combine sensitivity to Mexican culture and landscape, the pride he took in his Mexican identity, and a sophisticated modern technique that he had mastered in Europe. And he produced works of incredible power. So what became the Mexican muralist movement began when Vasconcelos assigned several well-known artists to decorate the Escuela Nacional Preparatoria, they call it the PREP, a demanding and prestigious Mexico City high school of 300 boys and 5 girls, one of whom was Señorita Frida Kahlo. Here, Rivera completed his first government-commissioned 1,000 square foot Renaissance-style mural called Creation, and it took him over a year, during which apparently Frida Kahlo heckled him quite mercilessly. So these 12-foot high figures are scaled in proportion to a huge pipe organ that surrounds the mural. They're allegorical, and you need a program to keep up with what's going on. At the top is a symbol which could represent the Divine Trinity, or could just as well represent the Egyptian iconography of Aton, symbol of the creative sun. At the bottom, behind the stand there, behind the podium, is Eve, nude, of course. The model was Guadalupe Marin, who was his second wife, whom he married when he came back to Mexico in 1922. And Adam is there too. Over them on both sides are the 9 muses. Above the muses are the Christian virtues. From the left, love, hope, and faith. And on the right side, prudence, justice, and strength. In the sky, we have wisdom and science. Make a close-up view of these things. So this work is done in encaustic, which means that pigment is applied suspended in wax, in molten wax, and there's plenty of gold leaf on it. And despite the bright colors that are typical of Mexican indigenous art, Rivera felt that it was too Italian. And so far, this mural doesn't have any political or ideological tendency to it. But that omission was rectified in 1922, when Rivera, who had now joined the Mexican Communist Society and had co-founded a revolutionary artist union, began a series of frescoes entitled The Ballad of the Proletarian Revolution that focused on Mexican society and the country's revolutionary past. And he would not complete these for 7 or 8 years, till 1928. It's a huge thing. The finished work is 128 frescoes covering more than 5,000 square feet, installed in Mexico's Secretariat of Public Education building, Education Ministry. So on the first floor, mural topics focus on Mexican festivals and Mexican labor. The second floor concentrates on science and technology. On the third floor, we have ideology, the populist approach to government, communist ideology of Rivera. More here. And interestingly, some of the images in this section of decadent capitalists downing martinis, images like this will recur in his American murals. It almost seems to predict the stock market crash of 1929. And these murals still exist, of course, and they are, as you can see, under constant state of preservation. Now, we know that Diego Rivera was muy grande. In fact, he weighed 300 pounds, but he was only one of the tres grandes of Mexican muralism. There are similarities and differences in their work. They were all trained in Europe, and they all worked at the National Prep School in that first project, the opening salvo in muralism, and they all worked in the United States. But Jose Clemente Orozco's view of the Mexican Revolution differed radically from those of Rivera and David Alfaro Siqueiros. So Orozco, disturbed by the bloodshed and death, was cynical about the revolution and skeptical about its ability to benefit the poor, who, in his view, would suffer no matter who came out on top. Orozco's focus on human suffering, no doubt related to his personal story. His left hand had been amputated following an accident with fireworks. Bad for an artist. And he spent 2 unhappy years in San Francisco and New York working as a sign painter. All this in addition to what he witnessed during the revolution, which, for example, by the way, Diego Rivera never experienced. He was not in Mexico during the revolution. But despite his empathy for humanity at large, Orozco had a notorious inability to connect with others. And Mexican poet Octavio Paz once said that Orozco never smiled in his life. Certainly he didn't smile when doing his own self-portrait here. So oddly, he challenges the nationalist sentiment that provided him and the others, not just with work, but with fame. So at the Prepa, his earliest mural is this maternity that he did, very European in flavor with blonde characters in it, and the blue cloak of Mary there is, blue is almost always used for Mary in Italian art because the pigment, lapis lazuli for it, was the most expensive. Women are naked though, of course, that's new. So Orozco returned to the Escuela in 1926 to add a new set of frescoes, including the Trench, which depicts revolution fighters. So if the first version was like Rivera's, not ideological and very Italian in the way it's done, now we're entering into a fully developed style for Orozco, much more modern. The forms are less modeled, they're flatter, they're outlined, the line is expressive, and the palette, the dark palette, is reflective of the emotional content of the mural. The 3 men here could be interpreted as 3 men or a single soldier depicted in 3 moments in time. Now, Orozco created the first Mexican mural in California, this huge Prometheus at Pomona College. He did this in 1930. In it, the Titan here is about to give mankind the power of knowledge for which Zeus will cruelly punish him, as the Greek myth does recount. Now, Jackson Pollock and Philip Guston, who both went to Manual Arts High School in Los Angeles, were known to have stood in awe in front of this mural. And in Dive Bombers and Tank, which was painted over 10 days in 1940 in front of an audience at MoMA, New York, where it is today. Now, this work again shows that Orozco was much more of a modernist than the other 2 greats. The work is pretty abstract, and he says it could be assembled in any order. It lacks any kind of narrative clarity. Like, for example, we could ask what the legs are doing over there on the right. Are they legs of the pilot of the dive bomber? Is this an innocent victim on the ground? We don't know. So that's Orozco. David Alfaro Siqueiros was the most political of the three. He spent time in jail for his beliefs. He was thrown out of the US because of them, and he was expelled from Mexico for his role in the assassination of Leon Trotsky when Trotsky was feeding his rabbits. In 1914, Siqueiros was 18 and he joined the rebel army. And during his travels around Mexico with the military, he discovered pre-Hispanic art and he witnessed the living condition of Mexican laborers, two things that would deeply inform his art. In 1919, he, like Rivera, received a grant to study in Europe, where he was impressed by Cubism and Futurism, as well as the Italian frescoes that had so impressed Rivera. In fact, Siqueiros and Rivera met in Paris and became friends. And when he returned to Mexico in 1922, he helped Rivera found the Artists Union together. And of course, he was engaged as a muralist at the Prepa. And this is what he did. On a staircase ceiling, Siqueiros depicted this monumental winged female surrounded by representations of the four elements. So we have wind, fire, the seashells for water, and the earth at the bottom. The sandy colored background makes it look almost like an icon, a Byzantine icon, and it's a very, very statuesque, sculpturesque figure inspired by European painting. And the intense colors maximize that contrast. And the figure is weighty and plastic. Unlike the forms in the rest of the building, such as Rivera's creation, the figures are fairly flat. But this formal treatment reflects his understanding of traditional European painting. So Siqueiros went to LA in 1932, where he experimented with new painting techniques, even including airbrushes, projectors, things like that. And with a team, he painted 2 murals in Los Angeles. The first one is called Street Meeting, depicts a group of workers of mixed ethnicity on a work break listening to a labor agitator's speech. Didn't take long. This was whitewashed over within a year of its unveiling, possibly because of weather-related issues. It's a mural outside, but also because it was pretty pro-communist. It's still there in LA in a building owned by Chouinard Art School. It's under the whitewash, but it hasn't been conserved yet. But his other significant public mural in Los Angeles, Tropical America, was on Olvera Street, which is the old Mexican heart of Los Angeles. Now, this thing was intended to show the abundance of tropical lands, fruit falling into waiting hands and all that sort of thing. But instead, it became a polemic against American imperialism with a crucified Indian at the center. This is not Siqueiros in the photo here. I don't know who it is. Like his first mural, this was also considered by some, probably by many, as communist propaganda, and it was whitewashed in 1938. 80 years later, the Getty Conservation Institute performed restoration work on the mural, which they did not even know for sure what the colors were. It was so faded, and the photographs from the time were all black and white. This became accessible in the public in 2012. So it's conserved, but not actually recreated. And this is what you can see. And this is a digital rendering that's projected on it. It looks pretty good. So Siqueiros in 1936 was in New York, and he led an experimental workshop where he was influenced by surrealism, free association, automatism, psychoanalysis. And the course included an exercise in which a canvas was placed on the ground and paint was thrown on it directly from a can of paint which had a hole poked in it, what he called controlled accident. Who do you think was at this program? None other than, oh, there it is, Jackson Pollock. And the impact of this exercise on Pollock's drip paintings is evident. There they are. That's Pollock on the right, Siqueiros on the left. So from in the late 60s through the 70s, Siqueiros worked on his last and most important piece, did many other things too, The March of Humanity on Earth and Towards the Cosmos, an immense work that would occupy over 4,000 square meters. Here it is, the largest mural ever painted. It's in the Poliforum Siqueiros, part of the World Trade Center in Mexico City. The outside is 12 panels of sculpture and painting, and the interior walls and ceiling house a mural, which visitors can experience while standing on a rotating stage, listening to a narration by Siqueiros. And the message in this giant work is difficult to decipher, although it seems to fuse two visions of human progress, one international and one based in Mexican heritage. But that's the other two. Back to Rivera. In 1927, he visited the Soviet Union to celebrate the 10-year anniversary of the October Revolution. While he was there, he met Alfred Barr, who was director of the Museum of Modern Art in New York, who would become a friend and patron. On his return to Mexico City, Rivera divorced his wife and married Frida Kahlo. He began a cycle of murals, there we go, in the National Palace, an ambitious panorama of Mexican history beginning before the conquest and continuing until the present, including tensions with Mexico's powerful neighbor to the north. He also began a series of murals for the American consulate in the Palace of Cortez. Yes, that Cortez. This is the oldest civil building in the Americas. This is in Cuernavaca. This was commissioned by the American ambassador, Dwight Morrow. Rivera's relationship with American capitalists led to his expulsion from the Mexican Communist Party in that year. And that's the year that the couple then arrived in San Francisco. Now, apparently, I don't know, the immigration authorities were unaware of Rivera's strained relations with the party, but in any case, they were refused visas until Albert Bender stepped in. Bender, who had come to San Francisco from Ireland, became quite wealthy in insurance, and he began buying and giving away art. Many early acquisitions at SF MoMA, which began in 1935, for example, were given or bequeathed by Bender, and he deserves credit for helping Ansel Adams at the start of his career. But the biggest thing he ever did was to secure a visa for Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo to come to San Francisco. Now, of course, you know, Rivera painted 3 murals in San Francisco in 1931 and came back in 1940 to paint the astonishing 10-panel Pan-American Unity, his last and largest commission in the US. And Bender, for his part, donated Diego Rivera's flower carriers and Frida's wedding portrait to SF MoMA, 2 very important works in the museum's collection. And shows their difference here. Now, Rivera had a huge influence on local artists. He and Frida stayed in sculptor Peter Stackpole's studio, where many local artists met him, including a young guy named David Park. He was there too. So here's making of a mural that's at the San Francisco Art Institute. There he is. Many people sort of feel that Diego sitting up there is mooning the public. And to show you, this is a close-up of the head of the giant figure that we're painting there. So this is done in fresco technique. So what this means is that a drawing is made, sketched out on rough plaster, and then finished plaster is spread on small areas. They can only work on as much as can be done in a day because it's going to dry. So while the plaster is wet, the color is applied, right? And so it works best with fairly simplified forms, and it's a permanent medium. So the pigment becomes part of the plaster. So it's ideally suited to Diego's style of painting. So this technique comes from Italian traditions, but it's also not dissimilar to what was done in pre-Hispanic Mexico at Teotihuacan here. These are murals laid down on plaster, lime plaster over clay, dominated by red, though there are other colors present. The style is flat and linear, as Diego's often is. And likewise, he is interested in other forms of pre-Columbian imagery in which the figures are round, kind of squat, wide, and this is the shape he adopts for depicting human beings. As we can see here in mural number 2, the allegory of California. I mean, done in 1931 in what was then the Stock Exchange, a communist painting in the Stock Exchange. It's now called the City Club, and you can see these murals, or when things are open, you can, with reservations and so forth. This is what it looks like. It goes all the way up onto the ceiling. And this lovely sketch here is of the boy whom you see there with the airplane. It's a sketch for him. And this is Peter Stackpole, son of the sculptor in whose studio they stayed. You actually know Peter Stackpole's work if you've ever seen photographs of the Bay Bridge being constructed, because he was about 17 years old and he went up there and took these fabulous photographs. He became a photographer for Life magazine later in his life. So that's 2. 3 is this flowering almond trees done for Rosalie Stern in her home in Atherton, where Diego and Frida were guests. So the children in this mural are Rosalie Stern's grandchildren. That's underneath the tree, that's Walter Haas. And the children with their hands in the fruit basket are Peter Haas and Rhoda Haas on the right. The girl on the left is Rhoda's imaginary friend. Rivera was kind enough to include her. So they're in San Francisco. After a short return to Mexico, the couple went to New York, where a retrospective of Rivera's work would be shown at MoMA, New York. Only the second one-man show in the new museum. The first had been devoted to Matisse. So he's up there in people's consciousness. Nearly 60,000 people saw that show. After that, it was on to Detroit, where Rivera was to paint murals at the Detroit Institute of the Arts. The theme was Detroit industry, mainly the Ford plant, one of the first vertically integrated concerns in the country. So Rivera spent 3 months touring the plant, preparing hundreds of sketches and ideas for the mural. He was amazed by the technology and the modernity of Detroit's plants. There we go. For 9 months, Rivera and his crew worked 15-hour days without breaks to complete the 27 panels, which Rivera later said constituted his best work. Rivera worked so hard that he lost 100 pounds. His own workers agitated for better pay, and 6,000 plant workers, Ford workers, went on an unsuccessful strike during which 5 men died. So this charged atmosphere of protest against one of the world's largest and most powerful industries doubtless affected Rivera, and his depiction of Henry Ford's empire has a decidedly leftist bent. And I like this with the giant figures at the top, even though the lower part's not real clear. Remember that in the 30s, there was a great deal of intellectual sympathy for Marxism, so that Rivera's work, which connected so strongly to regionalist work, American regionalist work in the Depression, was generally tolerated, but not always. So as you know, in October 1932, Rivera was commissioned to paint a mural at Rockefeller Center, and this time his big frame was right in the sights of critics. The explicit communist sympathies of the work with Lenin and the working classes on one side, and there's the Rockefellers, again, the image of decadent capitalism, dancing girls, cards, martinis, and so forth. It was too much to ignore. He got a start on it. What he had done was covered over. He was paid for what he did, and the rest was left unfinished, and the whole thing was destroyed in 1934. Though Rivera was able to use photos of the original to paint a replica. That's what I showed you a second ago. That's the replica. In the Palacio de Bellas Artes in Mexico City. And there we have them. All right. So Rivera and Kahlo returned to Mexico in 1933. Kahlo apparently was happy to be home, but Rivera missed the adulation he received in the US. He received no mural commissions between 1936 and 40, but he was devoting his time to easel painting, which he was exceptional at. Life, however, was none too easy at the time. Rivera had an affair with Kahlo's sister, Cristina. Meanwhile, Kahlo had affairs with men like sculptor Isamu Noguchi and with Leon Trotsky. She also had affairs with women, such as actress Dolores Del Rio. Apparently, Rivera didn't mind her affairs with women as much as the ones with men. And she moved out of their home and back into the Blue House. Despite tensions between them, however, Rivera was always Kahlo's greatest fan, proud of her increasing fame and acceptance, and for her too, Rivera always came first. Still, they divorced in 1939. Rivera at the time was having an affair with actress Paulette Goddard, wife of Charlie Chaplin. Rivera explained himself this way: "I have never been a faithful husband. I love her too much to want to keep inflicting suffering on her. That's why I decided to divorce her." She answered that she would rather endure anything at all than lose me entirely. "All I really wanted was to be free to turn to any women who took my fancy." Actually, yesterday I was going over this and I said, should that be woman or is it women? I looked back, it's women. He wanted all women, any women who took his fancy. And he continued. "During the 2 years we were apart, Frida did some of her best painting and thus sublimated her sorrow in painting." For her part, Kahlo once said, "I have had 2 catastrophes in my life, the bus accident and Diego Rivera." So in May 1940, an assassination attempt had been made on Trotsky, and in August, he was murdered. Rivera left for the US, claiming that he had been suspected in the attack. In fact, he had already received an offer transmitted by SF MoMA's Grace McCann Morley to paint what would be his largest work and his last in the US, the fabulous Pan American Unity, painted in front of curious onlookers at the Golden Gate International Exposition in 1940 that was held on Treasure Island. He had 15 assistants, and it took about 4 months. The theme of this work is the fusion of the 2 cultures, North and South America, in the face of the destruction of Europe during World War II. So he said, "My mural is about the marriage of the artistic expression of the North and of the South on this continent. In order to make a real American art, this blending of the Indian, the Mexican, and the Eskimo with the kind of urge which makes the machine, which is also an artistic urge, the same urge, but in a different form of expression." So this is what we see in this mural, as in his others, his mixing of indigenous cultures with this fascination for the technology of the North. So let's look at, there are 10 panels, basically 5 that are double, a top one and a bottom one. These are the first 3, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about what's going on in these incredible works, in which there are 3 portraits of Diego Rivera. So all the way on the left, the top, we see images of Mexico's indigenous past with lots of gods, and we see the high peaks around Mexico City up at the very top. Okay, so that's number 1. The middle we see here, which is number 2, we see a diver named Helen Serlenkovich, who was a student at City College, diving over, she's over the Bay Area. And so we're blending ancient Mexico with the Bay Area. And Rivera wrote, "The conquest of time and space is symbolized by a woman diving." There he goes. Now, in the lower part of the upper section, we see a sculptor, Mardonio Magana, who was a peasant artist described by Rivera as the greatest contemporary Mexican sculptor. He's at work on a head of Quetzalcoatl, the great feathered serpent, so important in pre-Columbian cultures. And this represents the continuity of the ancient Mexican culture. And in the lower section, we have Rivera himself painting the portraits of the great liberators, Washington, Jefferson, Hidalgo, Morelos, Lincoln, and so forth and so on. Okay. Now, the third section, the center section, which is on your right here, Rivera anchors this with this unbelievable figure in the center, which is a combination of the Aztec goddess Coatlicue, the kind of the Earth Mother goddess, combined with a Ford Motor Company stamping machine. So symbolizing, he says, this union between North and South was a colossal goddess of life, half Indian, half machine. She would be to the American civilization of my vision what Coatlicue, the great mother of Mexico, was to the Aztec people. Now, at the bottom, you can see Frida. Frida was painted in after she joined him in San Francisco, and she, of course, personified to Rivera the cultural unification of the two Americas, with the South winning out. And I want to see if we can notice, if I can get my, oh, here we go. I can pick this up. Not clear enough, but can you see she's wearing earrings that are like little hands, and they were given to her by Picasso. So they were very special to her. And also behind her here, that's once again Diego. Here he is with Paulette Goddard. And this is the American girl in ties of friendship with a Mexican man, he says, and they're planting a tree of love and life. All the way over on the right, we have the man in the suit is Timothy Pfluger, the architect of so many buildings in San Francisco, and he's holding plans for the CCSF library where the mural was intended to go. Of course, this mural, this building was never built. There was problems during World War II, but those are the plans for it. So it's the first three. Let me see, I have to put this back. Okay. Now, the last two. So on the left, we see another panel that has a matching image of the female diver. This time she's over Treasure Island there, the setting of the exposition. And below, we have scenes from that typical art form, he says, of the North, the movies, from Charlie Chaplin's film, The Great Dictator. So we've got Hitler, Mussolini, and Stalin. And Rivera saw movies as a kind of moving mural that could likewise instruct us. And the final panel, as kind of a parallel to the first one, celebrates the technological genius of the North. So the first one, the values, the indigenous values of the South, and here the technological might of the North. Okay, the mural is 22 feet high by 73 feet long in these 10 sections. It's made of rigid steel frames which support the plaster, which was spread over a kind of screen. So it was designed to be transported because it was going to be taken right from the start to CCSF. And in fact, it was sized so that it could go on a truck through the tunnel off the bridge. The whole thing weighs 22 tons. It's just enormous. Let's see. Oh, we're going to skip that. And as you may or may not know, this mural is coming this year. Would have been there already probably, but COVID pushed things back. It's going to be exhibited at SF MoMA downstairs in the Roberts Gallery. This is a rendering of it, and I hope they measured very carefully. It's just going to fit in there. So the theater where it is at CCSF has to be remodeled. A new one is being built. They had to do something with the mural. So this plan was devised to bring it to SF MoMA, where presumably it will be able to be seen by far more people than have ever seen it before. And the work on this is all being paid for by the museum. This is a really cool project. So 1940, complete this mural. In December, Frida and Diego were remarried with a contract that stipulated no sexual relations because for Frida, the mere thought of his other women created a psychological barrier, but apparently the terms of this contract were never fulfilled. They were now living together in the Blue House, her family's home, and they were both appointed instructors at the recently opened Academy of Painting and Sculpture. And an American collector named Firestone commissioned these two portraits, one of each from them, paired selfies. Now, Kahlo was exhibiting and gaining recognition, but her marriage and her tempestuous relationship with Rivera was always on her mind. And in fact, in her works of the 40s, Diego's face appears a lot. She's definitely thinking about him. But nevertheless, if you track their two wedding portraits, you can see a change in their relationship. So in the first one, the early marriage, Diego is the dominant figure. But in 1940, Frida is the one behind, she's the big strong one supporting him. It's interesting. She developed a motherly attitude towards this man who was nevertheless now carrying on with yet another Mexican actress. And she said, he's my child, my newborn, my very own. And in Rivera's last great fresco, painted for the Hotel del Prado in Mexico City, he seems to agree, he seems to acquiesce in this role. So this is the famous Dream of a Sunday Afternoon in Alameda Park. Look how huge it is. So let me show you what's in the very center of this. Here we are. So that young gentleman is a 10-year-old Diego Rivera, right? Holding the hand of La Calavera Catrina, a skeleton figure which sort of parodies vanity. And the man next to her is the artist Guadalupe Posada, who invented this figure. So somebody whose work was influential on, was appreciated by Rivera. Let's see. So that's Diego, and behind him is, of course, Frida Kahlo. So we see sort of a mother and son relationship here. And this lovely portrait of Frida Kahlo was based on a photograph of her taken by her lover, the photographer Nicholas Murray. Now this work, this mural, was banned for 9 years because it showed a writer holding a sign that says, God does not exist. Well, Rivera removed the inscription so that the work could be displayed, but he maintained his own public commitment to atheism. He once said, I don't believe in God, but I do believe in Picasso. Now, by 1950, Kahlo spent the entire year in the hospital, but it was a busy time for Rivera. And I want to show you some of his late wonderful easel paintings, such as this one, or Elena Flores de Carrillo, that's fabulous. His second wife, Lupe Marin, a very strong looking woman there. And something in the painter's studio. And something I'm sure you would never expect to see, with this series of sunsets that he did in 1956, unusual. He continued work on his frescoes for the National Palace, and Rivera, Orozco, and Siqueiros represented Mexico at the 1950 Venice Biennale. He engaged in several mural and mosaic projects in Mexico City. When Kahlo came home from the hospital in 1951, she served as a model in this work, Rivera's Nightmare of War, Dream of Peace, which was intended to accompany an exhibition of Mexican art going to Europe. No deal, rejected, because Stalin and Mao were both in it. And on that subject, I wanted to show you a work of 1954 called The Glorious Victory, which is celebrating a coup d'etat of the CIA in Guatemala that took place in 1954. And I believe that's John Foster Dulles in the center. He loaned this work in 1958 to the Pushkin Museum in Moscow, where it disappeared from sight for 50 years. It was brought out in 2018. They had an exhibition of Mexican art. The reason it hadn't been seen is that apparently Mexican muralists, even the ones who were communist, most of them were, their works were categorized as formalist art, not subject to public display because their ideological bent was not strong enough. It's kind of interesting anyway. So there we go. Frida died in 1954 when she was only 47. Rivera was beside himself, wept openly at her cremation. He fell into despair and aged rapidly, they say. He continued to venerate Kahlo and regard her as a supreme artist. Nevertheless, he did manage to marry again in 1955. But 3 years after Kahlo's death, Rivera himself succumbed to a heart attack in his studio. He wanted his ashes to be mixed with Kahlo's, but unfortunately for him, he was nevertheless enshrined with great ceremony in the Rotunda of the Illustrious in the Cemetery Dolores in Mexico City. According to the New York Times, 20,000 people viewed his coffin in the Palace of Fine Arts, where it was in state, and 2,000 people attended the ceremony, including a band of communists who held up a red banner. And like Frida, or possibly with Frida, Rivera lives on, helped by the 10,000 works he painted in his life, the last of which was this one. Nice fruit. And Rivera has also been an active presence in culture, including in films such as The Cradle Will Rock, there he's played by Rubén Blades, or in Frida, played by Alfred Molina. He's there. And we should remember him, I think, not just as a cultural figure, not just as the man behind Frida Kahlo, but for the incredible impact he had on American art, especially in San Francisco, where the mural tradition was so strong. We should remember him for the beauty and power of his images that brought Mexico and its culture to the attention of the art world, for his exquisite technique. And finally, we should remember him for the superhuman effort it must have taken over and over again to paint on scaffolds, to paint on the ceiling of stairwells, to paint outdoors, and do it so extraordinarily well. So this is where I'm going to end for you, and let's stop the share and see if anyone has any questions at all. Ellen, do you know?
All right, so go ahead and start typing questions in if you have them.
Need some water.
I'm not seeing any questions.
Oh, okay, well, could it be that there are none? I covered everything?
Oh, which mural or painting is your favorite?
I really like the Allegory of California. I think that one is just beautiful. And I also like it because it's not as dense as some of them are. The figures are more spaced out a little bit, but I think that's a lovely one. And they're all really powerful.
So there are a few questions related to, well, let's see, war. So when he was living in Europe, was he not impacted by World War I? And then the second question is, what did he think of World War II?
Well, what he thought of World War II was that actually Pan-American unity in some senses was designed to provoke the US to join the war, to show the power that the two Americas had while Europe was kind of crumbling, was under the grip of Hitler. I don't know what he did during World War I. Yeah, he would have been in Europe then. He was there until 1922. So he was in Paris. I guess he managed to stay out of things. So I don't know the answer to that.
Do you have a recommendation of a great overview book?
Let's see. I thought somebody might ask that. I have several. I have kind of short ones to help you. Let's see. I should have made a list. So I use this one a lot. It's just a Prestel book by Isabel Alcantara. That's a backwards. That's a reasonable one. There's quite a number of them. There's a couple of books that are many books specifically about his murals. And in fact, there's one about San Francisco murals, both of Diego and of others, that is quite interesting. So there's enough. It's probably less on him than on Frida Kahlo at this point, but there's a lot out there. And his website is quite good. There's a Diego Rivera website that has information about a lot of the works with nice descriptions of them. So that's good. 20.
So what was his process for mural creation? Did he sketch on paper or something else, or do the scale?
He sketched all sorts. And in fact, SF MoMA has a ton of, well, I don't know, not a ton, maybe 20, maybe 40 of his sketches, most of which were donated by Albert Bender. But he did do tons of sketches, small scale ones, and then how exactly you scale them up to the size of these murals, I'm not positive how you do that, but he did extensive pre-drawing, as you would have to do, given how dense these things are. Yeah.
And is the Detroit mural still able to be viewed?
The Detroit mural, yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
The Detroit Institute of Arts, yeah.
Okay. Can you tell us anything about his parents? You mentioned they were teachers.
They were teachers. No, I don't know very much more about them. I mean, but like I say, he apparently was kind of an exceptional kid right from the start. But no, I don't know. His parents were teachers. They weren't artists. So, you know.
Cherry, did you want to answer the question on Detroit? We have a person behind the scenes.
Person behind the scenes.
And I see a comment. Anyway, how about watercolors?
He did watercolors. I mean, he worked in all kinds of media.
Do you know how many of those he might have done?
No, out of the 10,000 works he did, I don't know, like 750? I don't know. I mean, he did do small scale works, but he's mostly an easel painter. But artists like that, I mean, he was so skilled. Some of his sketches for the murals are in chalk and so forth. They're just lovely. So I'm sure he did a lot of watercolors as well.
Okay. Is there a tour of Rivera work in San Francisco?
I'm not certain that there's a tour. All the murals, except the one in Stern Hall at UC Berkeley, the others can be seen. The 3 can be seen. Whether the San Francisco tour group, the walking tours, whether they give a tour of all 3 of them, I don't know. They're quite far apart is the problem. And of course now, you know, you can't probably do anything, but all of the murals are available to be seen in non-pandemic times. You can see them, but I know the ones at the City Club, you have to make an appointment. It's a little bit challenging to do that.
So someone asked, in the last mural, did they see Eisenhower on a bomb?
Did you see him on there? I don't know. They may well have done. I mean, he's channeling Stanley Kubrick. I don't know, before the fact. I don't know. Or maybe that's where Kubrick got his ideas from. I don't know. A subject for more discussion.
Here's another mural question. Who did the murals in the building across from San Francisco Beach?
Oh, in the beach chalet, his name is Lucien Labeau. He was originally French, but he was one of the Coit Tower muralists. So San Francisco has more WPA projects in it than any city outside New York. And a lot of them are murals, and there's also sculptures and this and that. But yeah, that guy's name is Lucien Labeau, and he was also represented in Coit Tower. Many of the people in Coit Tower did other murals other places. They're hiding in plain sight, I guess.
Another question, did people know about Paulette Goddard's affair, and did that affect her career or marriage?
No idea. I mean, why Diego Rivera managed to be with as many women as he did is a mystery to me. He must have been incredibly charming. Some of his comments don't sort of indicate that, but I really don't know if that affected her career or not. Well, I guess how well do we know Paulette Goddard? So maybe it did.
So an audience member did make a comment that they were at the Detroit Museum about a year ago and saw the murals, and they were magnificent.
They're staggering. Yeah, I mean, when the amount of painting, the amount of work that goes into something like that, I think is really overwhelming. So we're going to be fortunate when they get them installed at SF MoMA to be able to see Pan American Unity. I think it'll be wonderful.
Did any of his students become famous artists?
He, the only time I know he was a teacher, he and Frida were appointed, not to my knowledge were any of his students become well-known artists, but a lot of the people that he knew when he was in Paris, like Adolfo Best Mogar, he became quite famous in Mexico. Some of them really did interesting things when they came back to their home countries, but I don't think any of his students did.
Do you know when MoMA will be receiving the mural?
No, I don't. As I said, the plan was that it probably should have been up by now, but of course everything shut down over the summer. I think by late winter it should be up. Here's the thing, it was designed to be portable. It was designed to be taken somewhere else. But once they installed it, and they didn't install it until the early 60s in the theater out there, once they did, they installed it permanently. So getting it off is a huge, huge work. SF MoMA has sent people to Mexico is the world center for dealing with murals. And they've had technicians come here to figure out how to do it. And it's going to take like 10 trucks. It's going to be massive. It's a huge project to move it, but it's going to be cool. Hopefully it'll all work out. Nobody will
So I think I see one final question,
Okay.
Which is not art, but do you know anything about his daughter?
Oh, the Marika, yes, the one who's so dramatic. I can't remember. I looked her up, and yes, she lived in England. She was a dancer and a performer. Apparently, Rivera never really acknowledged her. I think she went to Mexico once or twice, and it was Frida Kahlo who, you know, didn't want any connection there. He had another daughter with, I think with Guadalupe Marin. Yeah, must have been, named Ruth. But Marika is a very kind of stunning personality who's worth looking into. But she was like a minor celebrity in England in the sort of 50s, 60s.
Well, we've run a little bit over, but
Yeah.
I'd really like to thank you, Avril, for this wonderful lecture.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for people coming to hear about Diego, right? It's great. SF MoMA, in addition to the mural, was planning an exhibit called Diego Rivera in America that was for next spring. It's been put off, but it will probably next fall, it will be there. So, you know, you can remember all these little facts, I'm sure you will. But it's really great to see Frida is so overwhelming now, and for good reason, but Diego was a powerful master artist. There's a San Francisco artist named Rupert Garcia who says Diego is a monster artist, meaning really. And so I think it'll be wonderful to see these things. So thank you very much for asking me to come, Ellen.
Thank you very much, and we hope to see you back in the future.
Okay.
And we hope to see the audience members, well, at least know that you're there at one of our future WOW lectures.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye.
Right.